Grüß, willkommen in einem anliegenden Verlegens video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 12 of my Star Trek TOS timeline series of videos. In this video I'll discuss the early exploration and colonization of interstellar space by the United Earth Territories. It must be noted that the timeline of the TOS universe is not our timeline. Some pivotal event occurred in 1968 or 69 which caused the timelines to diverge, which I discussed in my previous videos. One effect of this change is the different focus on space travel. In the Star Trek TOS timeline, space exploration and colonization occurs much more than it does in our timeline. The two global conflicts and the appearance of the Vulcans may have been the cause of this. Earth, or the United Earth Territories' first manned interstellar spacecraft was the SS Botany Bay, containing Khan and a number of his fellow supermen and women. The spacecraft was launched in 1996, and at this stage the craft was sublight. Its speed is unknown, but it must have been at least 67 light years away from Earth when found. If it was too close to Earth, Kirk would have not deposited Khan and his crew so far away from Earth. If this is correct, it was capable of high relativistic speeds, perhaps up to 0.25 light speed. This is very fast. By the looks of it, whatever accelerated the ship to this speed was no longer operating, so it was no longer accelerating. Atomic engines were often used in Star Trek, so this may be an early atomic engine spacecraft. Perhaps Earth had developed an ion engine with real punch powered by atomic engines. This spacecraft most likely attracted the Vulcans, who came to Earth to say hello and most likely changed Earth history forever. The DY-100, that is Khan's ship, was most likely designed and built for interplanetary travel only, to assist in the colonization of Mars and the exploration of the outer system. Khan did convert it to a sleeper format and may well have increased its fuel supply to allow it to reach speeds not required within a system. Saying that, it's also possible it was designed to allow for interstellar travel as well as interplanetary travel, and may well have been used in the first mission to Alpha Centauri, but I seriously doubt this. The dates just simply don't work. The US was probably the main nation involved in space exploration, but before the Vulcans came along there must have been another driver lacking today. I suspect the space race with the USSR was still raging, perhaps in this world, that is the Star Trek TOS world. After the US landing on the moon, the Soviets decided to double down and go for Mars. The Star Trek timeline has two superpowers locked in a more vicious Cold War than in our timeline, which resulted in both an accelerated space race and, of course, a real war in 1986. By the end of the Eugenics War in 1996, both superpowers had joined into some form of alliance in order to defeat Khan. In a normal world, both superpowers would separate again and become rivals, but in 1997 the Vulcans appeared and the alliance was now permanent. Perhaps the alliance was initially uneasy, but this was soon forgotten and both superpowers merged to become the United Earth Territories by 2050. Whatever differences they may have had, it was minor compared with the possible differences with aliens. Saying all that, it's quite possible that there was still a USSR on Earth well beyond this date. It's just that it was under the control or part of the United Earth Territories. Interesting thing to speculate. Could be the reason why Chekhov is so pro-Russian. I suspect in 1997, when the first Vulcans arrived, there were bases on the Moon and Mars, properly built and manned by both powers. There would have been space stations in orbit around Earth as well, but little else. The US has developed a revolutionary spacecraft by 1992, possibly the latest 96, the DY-100, which was a game changer. Initially it would have been used to fast-track any colonization of Mars as well as exploration of the asteroid belts. I suspect after the Vulcans appeared, the space budget would have ballooned and both superpowers would have worked very closely together. The interesting question is, would the DY-100 be used for any possible interstellar exploration? Could achieve 0.25 speed of light with special boosters and additional fuel, and it could, in theory, reach Alpha Centauri in 16 to 18 years. It seems reasonable that probes, which could travel at higher speeds, were launched first. But with the perceived threat from space, this was possibly the number one priority of both the USSR and the US space exploration. If a probe was launched in 1997, which could travel at 0.5 C, it could reach Alpha Centauri in 9 years, or 2006. This may well have been a DY-100 modified. Based on the initial findings, a manned mission could have left the following year, although it's likely this used the far more advanced DY-200. Based on this, I suspect, apart from Kahn's DY-100, the DY-100 was never used for manned interstellar travel. If we assume the DY-200 would reach Alpha Centauri in 2024, which is rather unfortunate because in 2018 Earth had developed the DY-500, which had FTL capability, using an early force of impulse drive copied from the Vulcans. Perhaps initially its speed was 1 times the speed of light, which means if launched in 2019 it would reach Alpha Centauri in 2023, 1 year before the poor old DY-200. I suspect that they would have only launched an unmanned DY-500 supply ship in 2018 to assist the earlier launched DY-200. After all, why bother sending a second manned mission? You've already got the guys almost there anyway. But in simple terms, the sublight exploration of space was over, and it was very short-lived indeed. It's very possible the parents of Zefram Cochrane were on this initial manned mission to Alpha Centauri in the DY-200. He was, that is, Zefram Cochrane, was born in 2030, 6 years after this ship supposedly could have arrived. On the other hand, many more DY-500s would have arrived at Alpha Centauri before 2030, so his parents may well have been on one of these later colony ships. An interesting speculation. I estimate Mars started sending out a DY-500 colony ship as well. At least 3 missions, and perhaps more, to an unknown system or systems. It could be Alpha Centauri, it could be Sirius A, which is 8.7 light years away, or Procyon A, which is 11.4 light years away. Both are sun-like, sort of, and may have contained habitable planets. I'm uncertain which planet they went to, but these colonies were token colonies consisting of 100 to 200 colonists each, and with minimal follow-up support, and all Mars needed was 1 DY-500, possibly even an older second-hand one in order to achieve this. When Mars forcibly joined, or was forcibly joined with the United Earth's territory, United Earth would have started fully supporting these 3 colonies, and they would have grown rapidly afterwards. As for the initial Earth-originated colony, that would have been in the Alpha Centauri system. If founded in 2024 and supported by a fleet of 8 DY-500 spacecraft, it could expect new colonists each year and would have grown much quicker than any of the latter colony planets. Assuming this chart is correct, the DY-500 looks like it has a significantly greater volume and probably needs less reaction mass. Thus, a passenger capacity of 1,000 is not unreasonable, including supplies and equipment. In the 15 years from 2024 to 2039, Alpha Centauri's population could be expected to be over 150,000, which means it was beginning to rival the Mars colony, which may at this time had a population of 1 million. By the time Mars joined the United Earth territories, Alpha Centauri's population had probably grown to over 300,000, assuming no new DY-500 spacecraft were built, which is unlikely, but they may have been, any new DY-500s may have been allocated elsewhere. After 2050, the Earth had to support 3 Martian colonies as well, which would have required additional spacecraft, and these, instead of being used for Alpha Centauri, were probably used to develop the 3 Martian colonies. Apart from the Alpha Centauri colony and the 3 Martian colonies, Earth would have used newly built DY-500 spacecraft and more advanced spacecraft to travel even further to establish bases and research stations. I suspect by 2060 the United Earth territories spanned 50 light years in all directions and consisted of 15 occupied systems, 2 to 5 of which could have been mining, and the remaining 10 to 13 colonies. In 2060 there would have been 3 major planets, Earth, Mars and Alpha Centauri. In the TOS scripts it strongly implies it takes a colony 100 years to achieve a population of 1 million, but Alpha Centauri may have been the exception, or at least was similar to Mars. Mars and Alpha Centauri were probably fast-tracked in terms of colonists arriving, because at the time they were the only game in town. After these 2 examples, I expect the 100-year time frame would be reasonably accurate. In 2060, Alpha Centauri may well have had a population of less than 1 million, Mars less than 10 million, and Earth may have had a population of less than 10 billion. In 2060, the other 9 colony planets would have been very small, certainly agricultural only. Further colonists would have only been sent once food was being produced at a certain level, but the 3 Martian colonies may have grown more rapidly and may consist of several thousand people each. The other 6 United Earth Territory colonies were all probably all under 1,000 colonist each, so they were rather small. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to link a planet in the TOS script to an actual real location, so it's impossible to determine the names of these colonies or even where they're located. But I've made a guess based on the idea that Sun-like stars could contain 1.5 habitable planets each, on average. This matches our own Sol. Earth is 1 and Mars, let's say, is only really worth half a habitable planet. I'm certainly not suggesting this is correct in any way, shape or form, but this is a guess of the location of the colony planets based on the order of founding. I think the density of planets may be too high in this estimate, but in the early period of space travel, impulse speed was low, so being close provided significant benefits. This is, as I've indicated, pure speculation, and to get a better estimate I would need to study each system in greater detail, as some of these stars may have problems which make them impossible to colonise. In addition, my estimate of 1.5 planets per system may also be too high, or at least I need to set a number of planets based on the star type than just using a general 1.5 planets per something approximately similar to Sol. The period between 2018 and 2060 would also see dramatic improvements in spaceflight. The SS Valiant's mission to the edge of the galaxy probably started in 2055, and its speed was likely 20 times the speed of light. Once the speed was increased, there would have been less incentive to focus on a few colonies with a large spacecraft filled with colonists. Instead, the ships would carry less colonists and more colonies would be founded because high-speed ships could support that type of rapid growth strategy. Mars needed a fleet of 12 spacecraft to support its growth because there was nowhere else these ships could go to. Alpha Centauri also needed a small fleet of ships to support it because other locations were too far away at those low speeds. Once speeds were exceeding 10 times the speed of light, one ship could support a single colony which was within 10 light years away. In 2061, Zefram Cochrane invented warp drive, which had a dramatic impact on speeds. This is a technology which may be unique to the Earth or Terrans, as the Vulcans and Romulans only possessed impulse drive at this time. It was a very refined impulse drive. They used a very highly developed and refined impulse drive, but it was certainly slower than warp. After the development of this technology, warp, the outward expansion enters its next stage, the warp stage, which is when the expansion of the Federation really picks up steam in terms of areas covered. Prior to this, Earth had inferior space drive to the Vulcans, Romulans, and probably even Klingons. After this, it was able to rapidly catch up and grow. And so we come to an end of my part 12 of this Star Trek TOS timeline video, in this case covering the exploration and colonisation of interstellar space, at least initially. The script, or the episode scripts, can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.